Chijioke Olamide's life had always been a perfect machine, ticking away with wealth, power, and a heart that no longer had room for love. But everything changed in an instant. On a scorching afternoon in Lagos, as he sped down the busy streets, in his prized Lamborghini, he struck an old beggar woman. The collision was an accident. The consequences were not. As he rushed her to the hospital, the name she whispered in his ear stopped him dead in his tracks. Ngozi, his mother's name. Chijioke had thought she was long gone, abandoned by his father years ago. He had buried the past, his heart locked away in a vault of success and bitterness. But now, as he stared at this frail woman, who had once been his entire world, everything he thought he knew came crashing down. Was this truly his mother? How had she ended up like this? And what price would he pay to uncover the truth that had been buried for so long? Chijioke Olamide was a man who lived for success. The kind of success that left no room for doubt. At 32, he was the epitome of a self-made billionaire, an empire builder with everything at his feet. From the moment he stepped out of his high-rise penthouse, perched above the skyline of Lagos, he carried an aura of power that even the city's elite respected. Every day was a victory for him, a constant string of power, lunches, meetings, and parties in exclusive clubs that stretched into the early morning hours. His black Lamborghini glided smoothly through the bustling streets of Lagos. The roar of the engine, a symbol of his dominance over both the road and his world. But as much as his life seemed perfect, there was something missing. An emptiness he had long since learned to ignore. Chijioke had everything. Money, status, luxury, and more. He had the best cars, the most expensive suits, the finest watches, and a portfolio filled with endless assets. Every deal was another notch in his belt. But none of these accomplishments brought him peace. He had become a master at numbing his feelings, at burying the things that hurt him the most. The thing that hurt him the most, buried deep within, was his mother. He hadn't seen Ngozi, his mother, in years. He couldn't even remember the last time he heard her voice. His father, a ruthless businessman like him, had cast her aside in a single, cruel act that shattered their family forever. The day his father had thrown his mother out of their home left her destitute, alone, and vulnerable was the day Chijioke's childhood ended. He was only a teenager then, but the impact was lasting. His father had told him that his mother wasn't fit to be his wife anymore, that she was weak, unworthy of the life they had built. That day, Chijioke's heart hardened. He had lost his mother, but more than that, he lost any sense of love for his family. Instead, he buried himself in business, in the pursuit of more, in the illusion that success would fill the empty space. In his heart, Chijioke had sworn to never be weak like his mother, to never depend on anyone. The bitterness of that day had shaped him into the man he was now, chilled, calculated, and driven by one singular goal: power. And for years, it worked. He built his empire with unwavering focus, his eyes always set on the next big deal. His heart, however, remained a fortress untouched by the people around him. Women came and went, but none of them could break through the walls he had so carefully constructed. They were just distractions, fleeting pleasures in a world he had carefully curated to serve his ambitions. The high of closing a deal, the rush of securing millions of dollars in profits, that was what made Chijioke feel alive. Every day was filled with this euphoric chase. He felt the dopamine hit surge through him with every success, and for a brief moment, the emptiness faded. His entire world revolved around business and it was enough. But there were still moments, fleeting seconds, when something from the past whispered in the corners of his mind. A memory of his mother's voice, soft and warm, calling him by his childhood name. A memory of the day she had hugged him goodbye, tears in her eyes as she was forced to leave. But he quickly shut it down, refusing to dwell on those emotions. He had no room for sentimentality. He had no room for love. On the surface, everything in Chijioke's life was flawless. He controlled everything around him, bending the world to his will. He had every material possession a man could dream of. Yet the absence of family, of love, gnawed at him like an itch he couldn't reach. At times, he would find himself staring at his father's portrait in his office, the stern man who had shaped him. But even that didn't stir the emotions it once had. He was a machine now, built for success. He had long convinced himself that he didn't need anyone. Relationships, he could take them or leave them. The world was his playground, and the more deals he closed, the more victories he stacked up, the less he thought about the past. His mother's disappearance became nothing more than a faint echo forgotten, buried under layers of success. Until the phone call. It wasn't an ordinary call. His secretary, breathless, informed him that an unexpected package had arrived at his office. It was addressed to him personally, no return address. Inside, a small, tattered photograph slipped out from a worn envelope. He unfolded it slowly, his fingers trembling as his eyes scanned the picture. The image was faded, but unmistakable. A younger version of his mother, Ngozi, smiling warmly, holding him in her arms. He could feel his pulse quicken. His mother had sent it, but why? The realization hit him with the force of a storm. She was alive. Chijioke's heart raced, as the shock of the moment gave way to a creeping feeling of dread. How could she have disappeared for so long, and then suddenly sent this? The photograph seemed to mock him, reminding him of everything he had lost, and everything he had buried. The unanswered questions suddenly became too loud to ignore. But there was more. The photograph had a note written on the back, in a handwriting that was unmistakably his mother's. "I'm sorry. I never wanted to leave you. I'm closer than you'd think. Please forgive me." For the first time in years, Chijioke felt a flicker of hope that something, or someone, from his past was still there. But the question remained. Where had she been all this time? Why had she disappeared? And why now? The answers loomed on the horizon, just out of reach. It was the same day that Chijioke found the photograph that he decided to confront the past. Head-on, the need for closure gnawed at him. Who was this woman, and what had happened to his mother? For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel something other than anger or resentment. The wall that he had built around his emotions began to crack. He called his personal investigator and demanded answers. Hours later, the investigator came back with a lead. They had traced his mother's last known whereabouts to a modest part of Lagos, far from the wealth and grandeur of Chijioke's world. It was a place where people struggled to survive, where the streets were filled with beggars, the forgotten, the unseen. The twist hit him like a thunderclap. The woman who had once been his mother, so full of love, kindness, and warmth, had been living in the streets. She had been homeless, a beggar, surviving on the fringes of the very city he ruled. His world shifted. The man who had spent years building an empire was now faced with the bitter reality that the woman who had once given him everything had been left to rot. The man who believed in cold, hard success was now forced to confront a truth that was impossible to ignore. Success meant nothing if it had come at the expense of everything else, including the person who gave him life. Chijioke stood frozen, in disbelief. The high of business, the rush of financial power, none of it mattered anymore. The emptiness he had long ignored was now a raging storm within him, and there was only one thing left to do. He had to find her. He had to make things right. Chijioke Olamide lived in the fast lane, and he thrived there. Today was no different. As he stepped into the sleek conference room of one of his company's many subsidiaries, he could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Today's deal was massive, a merger that would solidify his company as the largest real estate developer in all of West Africa. His hands rested confidently on the table as the negotiation reached its peak. Every number was in his favor. His business acumen had never been sharper, and the deal was going to close in a few minutes. His mind wandered only briefly to the past. Something about a distant memory of his mother. But it was fleeting, like the shadow of a dream forgotten. Upon waking, he had long since built walls around the emotions that lingered from his childhood. His focus now was on the here and now, on the power, the control, the thrill of succeeding again and again. The deal was signed, the ink dried, and Chijioke walked out of the conference room with a triumphant smile. Another victory, he thought. Another step towards total dominance. The high of this success was everything he needed, everything that filled the emptiness inside him. For a brief moment, it was as if the universe had aligned itself perfectly, and Chijioke felt on top of the world. His empire was now untouchable, and he could almost taste the future, bathed in luxury and wealth. But even the highest of highs eventually fade. As Chijioke stepped into the elevator, his phone buzzed with a message. He glanced at it, a brief text from his personal assistant. "A package arrived for you. It's from an unknown sender. It's urgent." He paused. The message struck him as odd. He was used to receiving high-profile packages, but this one felt different. A nagging feeling began to settle in his gut, one that he couldn't explain. It was an unfamiliar sensation, the kind that rose when something seemed out of place, but his mind pushed it aside. He had more important things to focus on. He was unstoppable. The elevator doors opened, and Chijioke strode out toward his car. He climbed into the back seat, his mind still racing from the recent deal. But then, his thoughts turned back to his mother, the fleeting memory of her face, her warm smile. He hadn't thought about her in years, And yet, something about this moment made her memory creep back into his mind. He had long buried the pain of losing her, the anguish of her being discarded by his father, and he didn't want to go back. There he had worked too hard to get to this point, to build the empire that had become his identity. As the car sped through the crowded Lagos streets, he couldn't shake the sense that something was calling to him, something buried deep in his past. His heart began to race as he thought of his mother again. His father's anger, his mother's departure, it was all tangled up in his memories. But that was another life, another world, long since left behind. And yet, as if drawn by some invisible force, his thoughts kept returning to the woman who had once held him in her arms. Could she still be alive? After all these years? His car screeched to a halt. The driver's voice broke his thoughts. "Sir, are you all right? There's a woman on the road. ... Chijioke's eyes snapped forward, instinctively pressing his foot against the brake. The woman was old, frail, barely able to move quickly. She staggered across the busy street, barely looking up as the traffic around her buzzed relentlessly. Chijioke's heart skipped a beat. His gaze locked onto her. She was shabbily dressed, her face weathered with years of hardship. He swerved the car, but it was too late. The front bumper grazed her, sending her flying to the ground with a sickening thud. Time seemed to freeze. "Get out," Chijioke barked at his driver, rushing out of the car before it had even fully stopped. His legs felt heavy as he approached the old woman lying on the asphalt. The panic hit him like a shockwave, but he did his best to push it down. "Madam, are you okay?" His voice was frantic as he knelt beside her. His heart hammered against his ribs, his thoughts chaotic. The woman's skin was thin, fragile, like paper that had been weathered by the storms of life. She blinked weakly, looking up at him through glazed eyes. "Help, me, . Her voice was barely a whisper, but there was something about the way she said it that struck him deep in his chest. Something hauntingly familiar. Chijioke's pulse quickened. He couldn't explain why, but this woman's presence unnerved him. He gently lifted her, feeling the frailty of her body in his arms. He instructed his driver to rush to the nearest hospital. He didn't even think, he just acted, desperate to fix what he had broken, to save this stranger from whatever fate had brought her to this moment. As they raced through the chaotic Lagos streets, Chijioke couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. He stared at the old woman, now unconscious, in his arms. There was something in her face, something about the way she looked at him, that felt too familiar. He shook his head, trying to push the thought away. She was just another victim of the city's chaos, he reasoned. Nothing more. But when they reached the hospital, and the doctors took her inside, something unexpected happened. As the medical staff worked to stabilize her, she suddenly whispered, and Chijioke's breath caught. He froze. His mother's name. The name he hadn't heard in years. The name he had buried deep in his memory. The voice that had once sung lullabies to him as a child. That had comforted him during his darkest moments. He stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. His mind raced, and Josie, the old woman, this stranger, who had been lying in his arms, had called out his mother's name. There was no way it could be a coincidence. Could it be possible? Could this woman, this fragile soul, be the mother he had thought was lost forever? He was still grappling with the shock of it when the doctors pulled him aside, urging him to step into the examination room. Chijioke stood there, completely still. The words Ngozi echoed in his mind, as if the very universe had spoken them just for him. His mother's name. The sound of it, faint and broken from the lips of this frail woman, sent a rush of emotions flooding through him. A cocktail of disbelief, confusion, and something deeper, something raw, that he hadn't allowed himself to feel for years. His heart began to race, the adrenaline flooding his veins faster than it had ever done during any business deal or victory. Could it really be her? Could this weak, broken woman be the same vibrant woman who had once filled his childhood with love? Could she really be his mother? The woman he had been told was gone, lost to him forever. He couldn't allow himself to believe it. Not yet. Chijioke paced back and forth outside the examination room. His mind was a whirl of thoughts, each one more frantic than the last. For years, he had believed his mother was lost to him, tossed aside by his father's cruelty. He had buried the pain of losing her so deep that he had almost forgotten how to feel about it. Yet, now, everything had come rushing back at once, every memory, every lost moment. It felt like the world around him was spinning. He leaned against the wall, trying to steady his breathing. The sound of footsteps approaching pulled him from his thoughts. The doctor, a middle-aged man with glasses, appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Olamide, The doctor began. We've stabilized her, but she's in critical condition. She's been living on the streets for a long time. Her body is weak, and we need to run a series of tests to understand her full condition. Chijioke's pulse spiked. Is she going to make it? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Doctor hesitated, clearly troubled by the question. We're doing everything we can. But Mr. Olamide, there's something you need to know. The woman, she's showing signs of long-term malnutrition, severe dehydration, and something else. Heart sank. What did the doctor mean by something else? The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, making it hard to breathe. As the doctor spoke, Chijioke's mind wandered back to that cold day when his father had cast his mother out of their home. He had been just a boy, unable to comprehend the gravity of the situation. The man who had been his hero, his father, had turned into someone he no longer recognized. The words that had been hurled at his mother, "You're weak. You're a burden to this family. Leave, or I'll make you leave." Those words were forever burned into Chijioke's mind. It was a day he had tried to forget, but couldn't. The images of his childhood, filled with warmth, had been replaced with cold, empty rooms after his mother left. His father, consumed by pride and power, had insisted that Chijioke not show any weakness. He had to learn to be like him, stoic, unyielding, focused only on success. Chijioke had done just that. He buried his emotions and threw himself into building his empire. For years, he had believed that success, wealth, and power were the answers to everything. He didn't need love. He didn't need family. Those things were for the weak. But now, standing outside the examination room, staring at the fragile figure of a woman who may very well be his mother, he could feel the foundation of his carefully constructed world start to tremble. The walls he had built around his emotions felt flimsy, and the weight of his past was crashing down on him. The notion that his mother might have been living on the streets all these years, forgotten and discarded like some piece of trash, struck him with the force of a physical blow. He could barely hold back the tears that threatened to fall. His hands clenched into fists as the anger began to rise within him. How could his father do this? How could the man who had taught him so much about business, about being strong, about conquering everything, be capable of such cruelty? Minutes later, Chijioke was allowed into the examination room. The woman lay in the hospital bed, pale and fragile, her face gaunt from years of hardship. Her skin was lined with age and sorrow, but her eyes, the eyes that once had shown him love, were still there. They locked onto his face, and for a brief moment, it felt like time stood still. For a second, Chijioke couldn't speak. He just stared at her, searching for the mother he once knew. She was barely recognizable, but the familiarity was there, the faintest trace of the woman who had rocked him to sleep, who had wiped away his tears, the woman who had once made him feel safe in a world that had now become foreign to him. "Mom," Chijioke whispered, his voice breaking. The word felt strange coming out of his mouth, as if it didn't belong in the world he had created for himself. She smiled faintly, her lips cracked and dry. "Chijioke," she croaked, the name slipping from her mouth as if it were a lifeline. A wave of emotions hit him all at once: guilt, anger, confusion, and sorrow. "Where have you been? Why didn't you come back? Why didn't you fight for me?" His voice rose in frustration, and he didn't even realize how desperately he was seeking answers. Tears welled up in his eyes as the truth hit him like a tidal wave. She wasn't just a victim of his father's cruelty. She had been a victim of circumstances beyond her control. She had fought for survival, alone, in a world that had no mercy. He had thought she had abandoned him, but it wasn't true. His mother had been discarded, alone, and desperate. "I tried. Chijioke," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I tried to come back, but your father, he told me never to return. He told me you didn't need me. And I believed him. I thought I could survive. I thought I could handle it. But I couldn't." The floodgates opened. Chijioke felt the pain of the years they had lost, the years he had spent numb and angry. The mother he had thought was lost was still here, and she had been fighting just as much as he had, though in a different way. His world, the one he had built on wealth and power, seemed so small now. The chase for success, the quest for dominance, it all felt hollow. Chijioke's emotions were in turmoil as he sat by her side. His entire life had been a facade castle built on the ruins of his past. The pain he had buried for so long was no longer something he could ignore. The truth was too painful to deny. That as his mother's frail hand reached up to touch his tea, he realized something. The success he had strived for, the empire he had built, meant nothing if it came at the cost of everything else: family, love, connection. He had spent so long trying to prove something to the world, but in the process, he had forgotten the one thing that mattered most, the people who truly loved him. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry for everything." She smiled weakly, brushing his cheek with her fingers. "You don't have to apologize, my son. We're here now. We still have time." Chijioke closed his eyes, allowing the weight of the moment to wash over him. He had always thought he was in control, but now, for the first time in his life, he felt completely vulnerable. His world had shifted, and there was no going back. He would never be the same again. The following days felt like a blur to Chijioke. The rush of adrenaline that had once accompanied his business deals, the dopamine highs of victories, now seemed inconsequential in the face of what he had just learned. His world was no longer defined by stock prices or luxury cars. It was defined by the fragile woman lying in the hospital bed. His mother, whom he had thought was lost to him forever. He spent every moment by her side. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. Her condition was improving slowly, but steadily. The once broken body was now receiving the care it desperately needed. And so was his heart. Every moment with her felt like a revelation. The woman who had been his source of warmth and love as a child had somehow managed to survive for years on the streets. She had borne so much pain, yet she still had the strength to forgive him, to welcome him back without hesitation. Chijioke had always believed he was strong, but now, he realized the real strength lay in her, the woman who had been cast aside, yet never stopped loving him. For the first time in years, Chijioke felt a sense of peace he had never known. He was learning to connect with emotions he had buried for so long. The guilt, the anger, the confusion, they were all slowly melting away. He no longer had to prove himself. The pursuit of wealth, success, and dominance felt meaningless without the love of family. As he sat by his mother's side, holding her frail hand, the weight of it all hit him. This is what matters. This is the real treasure. He had everything except the one thing he had taken for granted, his family, and now, he was ready to make things right. In the days that followed, Chijioke found himself spending more time with his mother, learning about the years she had spent searching for him, trying to survive in a world that had forgotten her. She had never stopped loving him, never stopped hoping he would come looking for her. The emotional walls he had built for so long were crumbling. But there was still one thing that needed to be addressed. His father, the man who had torn their family apart, was still alive, still running the empire that Chijioke had inherited. The man who had turned a blind eye to his mother's suffering and abandoned her without a second thought. Chijioke had always been his father's prodigy, his heir, but now, he was starting to see his father for what he truly was. A man who had traded love and family for power. Chijioke had never questioned his father's decisions until now. The cold indifference his father had shown to his mother, the selfishness that had driven him to destroy everything Chijioke had once loved, had finally become too much to ignore. And so Chijioke decided it was time. It was time to face the man who had shaped his life in the most painful way possible. It was a rainy afternoon when Chijioke walked into the mansion where his father still resided. A cold, imposing structure that had always symbolized everything his father represented. The man who had once been a towering figure in his life. The man who had taught him to never show weakness, to always put business first, was sitting in his study when Chijioke arrived. Chijioke could feel the tension in the air as he stepped into the room. His father, a man of power and control, sat behind his desk, his face unreadable. It was as if time had stopped between them, the years, the distance, the anger all hanging in the air. "Chijioke," his father said, his voice cold. "I didn't expect you to come back here. What is it you want?" Chijioke felt a surge of emotion he hadn't anticipated. Anger, hurt, and betrayal all collided within him. But he didn't raise his voice. He spoke slowly, deliberately. "You left her. You abandoned her," Chijioke said, his voice steady, but filled with an emotion his father had never seen in him. "You tore apart everything we had. And for what? Power, control." His father's eyes narrowed. "She wasn't strong enough. She was a liability to this family, to our legacy." "Legacy?" Chijioke spat, stepping forward. "You think a legacy is built on tearing people apart, on destroying the ones you love? You've built an empire, but it's empty. You've destroyed the very thing that should have mattered most to you. Our family. Your own wife. And you taught me that it was okay to do that." His father's face twisted with rage. "You're weak, Chijioke. You let her manipulate you." Chijioke shook his head. "No, you're the one who's weak. You abandoned everything for power. I thought I was like you, but I'm not. I'm not like you. For the first time, Chijioke saw his father flinch. His powerful figure, the man who had always seemed untouchable, looked smaller in that moment, vulnerable. But it didn't matter. Chijioke knew what he had to do. He walked away from the man who had shaped his life, knowing that the true measure of a man wasn't in his wealth or his empire, it was in the love he gave and received. And for the first time, Chijioke understood that. He had already found the treasure he'd been searching for. It wasn't in the boardrooms or the luxury. It was in the forgiveness and healing with his mother. Days later, Chijioke sat by his mother's bedside, watching as she slept peacefully. She had begun to heal, slowly but surely, both physically and emotionally. The bond between them was healing as well. There was so much to make up for, but Chijioke knew it would take time. As he watched her, a sense of peace washed over him. The business world could wait. The power struggles could wait. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel the constant need to prove himself. He had found his purpose again, one that was not defined by the empire he had built, but by the love he had rediscovered. The day he had dreaded, the day he had feared confronting his father was behind him, and though the road ahead was uncertain, Chijioke felt ready to face it. He had everything he needed now, not because of his wealth, but because of the love he had reclaimed. And as he looked out the window, the rain stopped, and the sun began to break through the clouds, shining brightly on the new path that lay ahead.